Good evening, dear friends. It's Margaret here, and I need to warn you before we begin tonight. This story is different. This one stayed with me for days after I first read it. I found myself thinking about it at odd moments, crying in my kitchen, calling my own mother just to hear her voice. The email arrived 2 months ago from a woman named Caroline Porter, a hospice nurse from Seattle, Washington. She's 47 years old and has worked in end-of-life care for 22 years. What she wrote to me isn't about ghosts or the supernatural. It's about something far more profound and heartbreaking. It's about what happens to the human brain at the end of life, about the patterns she's observed in hundreds of dying patients, and about the discovery that changed how she understood her entire career. Caroline asked me to share her story because she believes people need to understand what their loved ones experience in those final days. Not to frighten them, but to prepare them, to help them recognize the signs, to give them peace. So tonight, I'm going to read Caroline's words exactly as she wrote them. This is her story. Dear Margaret, I'm writing to you at 3 a.m. because I can't sleep, and I need to tell someone what I've learned. For 22 years, I've worked as a hospice nurse, caring for people in their final days and weeks of life. I've sat with hundreds of dying patients, held their hands, listened to their fears and their peace. I thought I'd seen everything there was to see about death, but 6 months ago, I noticed something, a pattern, something that every single one of my patients, regardless of age, diagnosis, or belief system, experienced in their final days. And when I finally understood what I was seeing, it broke my heart in a way I didn't think was possible after 2 decades in this work. Let me start at the beginning. September 2024. I was caring for a patient named Robert Chen, 73 years old, end-stage pancreatic cancer. Robert was a retired engineer, a deeply logical man who'd spent his life dealing in facts and data. He had maybe a week left, possibly less. His wife, Linda, was with him constantly, and their daughter flew in from Boston to be there. I was checking Robert's medication pump one afternoon when he suddenly became very alert. For days, he'd been drifting in and out of consciousness, the morphine keeping him comfortable but foggy. But this moment, he was completely present, his eyes focused on something across the room. "Who is that?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Linda looked where he was pointing, the corner of the room, near the window. "There's no one there, honey," she said gently, taking his hand. "The woman," Robert insisted. "In the corner. She's been there all day, just standing there watching." Linda looked at me, concerned. I'd seen this before, many times. Terminal patients often report seeing people that others can't see. It's common enough that we have a name for it, deathbed visions, usually attributed to medication, hypoxia, the brain's response to dying. "It's okay," I assured Linda quietly. "This is normal. The medications can cause hallucinations. It doesn't mean he's in distress." But Robert heard me. "I'm not hallucinating," he said with surprising strength. "I know what hallucinations are. This is different. She's there. She's real. And she's waiting." "Waiting for what?" Linda asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "For me, I think." Robert's eyes never left the corner. "She doesn't speak. She just stands there. But I'm not afraid of her. She feels peaceful, like she's here to help." Over the next 2 days, Robert spoke frequently about the woman in the corner. He described her in consistent detail, middle-aged, wearing a blue cardigan with kind eyes. He said she moved closer each day, that sometimes she smiled at him, that her presence made him less afraid of what was coming. Robert died 3 days later, peacefully, with Linda holding his hand. His last words were, "She's here, right here now. It's okay. I'm ready." At the time, I thought it was beautiful in a sad way, his brain creating a comforting presence to ease his transition. I'd seen similar things before, patients seeing dead relatives, angels, religious figures, the brain's way of coping with its own shutdown. But then, a week later, I was caring for another patient. Margaret Sullivan, yes, same name as you, 81 years old, congestive heart failure. Margaret was a former librarian, sharp as a tack until her final week, and she started talking about the woman in the corner. "Do you see her?" Margaret asked me during one of my visits. "Over there by the closet?" I looked. Nothing. "What does she look like?" I asked, expecting something different from Robert's description. "She's maybe 50, wearing a blue sweater. She doesn't say anything, just watches. She's been there for 2 days now." Margaret paused. I'm not scared of her. Is that strange? She feels like she's supposed to be here. My skin prickled. Blue sweater, middle-aged, peaceful presence, the same description Robert had given. Has she moved closer? I asked carefully. Margaret looked surprised. Yes, yesterday she was in the corner. Today she's closer. How did you know? I didn't answer. I finished my care duties and left, my mind racing. 2 patients, dying a week apart, describing the same figure in the same way. Coincidence? Shared cultural imagery about death? Or something else? I started paying closer attention. Over the next month, I cared for 6 more patients in their final days. And every single one of them, mentioned seeing someone in the corner of their room. The descriptions varied slightly, but the core details were always the same. A woman, middle-aged, wearing blue, silent, peaceful, progressive approach, starting in the corner, moving closer as death approached, never threatening, always patient, waiting. By November, I documented 12 cases, 12 dying patients, different backgrounds, different diagnoses, different belief systems, all describing the same presence. I started asking questions, checking with other hospice nurses, and that's when I learned I wasn't the only one noticing this pattern. After documenting a dozen cases, I did what any good nurse does. I started researching. I needed to understand what I was observing. Was this a known phenomenon? Was there medical literature about it? What I found was extensive. Deathbed visions, or end-of-life experiences, have been documented for centuries. Studies show that between 50 to 60% of dying patients report seeing deceased loved ones, religious figures, or other presences in their final days or hours. Most medical professionals attribute these visions to several factors: hypoxia, reduced oxygen to the brain as organs fail; medication effects, morphine and other pain medications can cause hallucinations; metabolic changes, as the body shuts down, toxins build up, affecting brain function; neurological processes. The dying brain may produce DMT or other compounds that cause vivid experiences, all logical, all scientifically sound. These were explanations I'd learned in nursing school, that I'd given to countless worried families, but none of them explained the consistency. Why were so many patients seeing the same thing? The same figure, the same progression, the same peaceful presence? I joined online forums for hospice workers, started conversations with colleagues across the country, and I discovered something remarkable. This wasn't just happening in Seattle. Hospice nurses from Portland to Miami, from Boston to San Diego, were reporting the same pattern. A woman in blue, appearing to dying patients in their final days. Some nurses called her the Blue Lady. Others had different names: the waiting woman, the peaceful presence, the guide. But the description was always fundamentally the same. I spoke with Dr. Amanda Chen, a palliative care physician I'd worked with for years. I showed her my documentation, told her what I was observing. She listened carefully, then sat back in her chair. "Caroline, I'm going to tell you something that doesn't leave this office," she said. "I've been noticing this for years, so have other doctors. We don't talk about it publicly because we don't want to seem unprofessional or unscientific. But yes, there's a pattern. And no, we don't have a satisfactory explanation for it." "What do you think it is?" I asked. She was quiet for a long moment. "I think the human brain at the end of life is doing something we don't fully understand yet. I think there may be neurological processes that create similar experiences across different people. Pattern recognition, archetypal imagery. The brain preparing itself for shutdown by generating comforting stimuli. But Caroline, that's speculation. The truth is, we don't know. And that makes a lot of medical professionals uncomfortable." I understood that discomfort. Modern medicine likes answers, explanations, measurable phenomena. "We don't know" isn't satisfying when families ask you what their loved one is experiencing. But I kept documenting. Every patient I cared for, I paid attention. I asked gentle questions when they seemed to be looking at something I couldn't see. And I discovered more details. The progression was consistent. First appearance, usually 3 to 7 days before death. Figure would start in the corner or far edge of the room. Each day, the figure moved closer. By the final day or hours, patients reported the figure being right beside their bed. Most patients weren't frightened. In fact, most found the presence comforting. Some talked to the figure, though they reported she never spoke back. The figure seemed to serve as a kind of marker. When patients reported her being very close or reaching out, death usually followed within hours. In December, I cared for a patient named Thomas Rodriguez, 67, end-stage COPD. Thomas was a former Marine, a tough man who'd lived a hard life. He wasn't sentimental, wasn't religious, didn't believe in anything he couldn't see or touch. On his 5th day in our hospice care, I found him staring at the corner of the room. "You see her too, don't you?" I said quietly. It wasn't professional, but I needed to know. Thomas looked at me, surprise in his eyes. "The woman in blue? Yeah. You can see her?" "No," I admitted. "But almost everyone I care for does, in their final days. They all describe her the same way." He was quiet, processing this. "So I'm not crazy. And it's not just the drugs." "I don't think so. I think this is something that happens to a lot of people at the end of life. We don't fully understand it, but you're not alone in experiencing it." Thomas nodded slowly. "She doesn't scare me. That's the weird part. I should be terrified, seeing things that aren't there, my brain failing. But when I look at her, I feel okay, like everything's going to be okay." "What do you think she is?" I asked. "I don't know. Part of me dying? My brain shutting down? Or—" He trailed off. "Or what? Or something real. Something we can't see except at the end, when we're close enough to death that the veil gets thin." He laughed, a raspy sound. "Listen to me. Sounding like some hippie mystic. The guys from my unit would give me so much shit." Thomas died 2 days later. He was unconscious for most of his final day, but in his last hour he opened his eyes, looked to his right where no one was standing, and smiled. "I see you," he whispered. "I'm ready." And then he was gone. I went home that night and cried. Not from sadness. Thomas had been ready. His death was peaceful. I cried because I was 22 years into this career, and I was just now realizing how little I understood about what my patients experienced, how much was happening that I couldn't see or measure or explain. In January 2025, everything changed. I met Dr. Patricia Morrison, a neurologist who specialized in end-of-life brain function. She was giving a presentation at a palliative care conference in Seattle about terminal lucidity, the phenomenon where patients with severe dementia or neurological damage suddenly become clear and coherent shortly before death. During the Q&A, I asked about deathbed visions, about whether there was research into why so many patients reported seeing similar things. Dr. Morrison's expression shifted. "Come see me after this session," she said. "I'd like to talk to you privately." We met in a quiet corner of the conference center. Dr. Morrison was in her early 60s, with kind eyes and the air of someone who'd spent decades studying mysteries. "You've noticed the pattern," she said. It wasn't a question. "The woman in blue. Yes, many of my patients see her." "I've been studying this phenomenon for 15 years, Dr. Morrison said. "Off the record, unfunded in my spare time, because no grant committee will touch it. Too close to the supernatural. Too uncomfortable for mainstream medicine. But Caroline, I think I know what's happening, and it's not ghosts or hallucinations." She pulled out a tablet, showed me brain scans. "This is fMRI imaging of a patient in their final 48 hours of life. Look at the visual cortex, the part of the brain that processes what we see." I looked at the colorful brain scan, not understanding what I was seeing. "It's hyperactive," Dr. Morrison explained. "Far more active than it should be. In fact, certain areas are more active than they are in normal waking consciousness. We see similar patterns in people under the influence of psychedelics, in deep meditation states, and in near-death experiences." "So their brains are producing visions?" I asked. "Yes, but here's what's fascinating. The visions aren't random. When we've been able to interview patients who survived near-death situations with similar brain activity, they report remarkably consistent experiences. Seeing figures, usually female, usually associated with comfort and guidance. The specifics vary across cultures. In some places she's described as an angel, in others as a deceased relative, in others as simply a presence. But the core experience is the same. "Why?" I asked. "Why would the dying brain create this specific experience?" Dr. Morrison leaned forward. "That's the question I've spent 15 years trying to answer, and I think I finally understand. It's not one cause. It's multiple factors working together." She pulled up another slide. "First, neurochemistry. As the body shuts down, the brain releases a flood of endogenous DMT, dimethyltryptamine, a powerful hallucinogenic compound. It's produced naturally in the pineal gland and may be released in large quantities at death. This creates vivid, meaningful experiences. Second, pattern recognition. The human brain is wired to recognize faces and human figures, even where none exist. It's a survival mechanism. In an altered state of consciousness, this tendency amplifies. The brain finds patterns, creates figures, makes sense of sensory noise. Third, archetypal imagery. Carl Jung theorized about universal symbols that appear across cultures: the mother figure, the guide, the threshold guardian. These may be hardwired into human psychology. At the end of life, the dying brain may access these deep archetypal patterns. Fourth, social conditioning. We live in a culture saturated with images of death: angels, spirits, guides. Even people who aren't religious have absorbed these cultural narratives. At the end of life, the brain may draw on these shared images to construct a comforting experience. And fifth, and this is the part I find most significant, the brain is preparing for shutdown. It's processing its own death. And it does what the brain does best. It creates a narrative, a story that makes the inexplicable experience of ceasing to exist feel manageable. I sat with this information, trying to process it. So the woman in blue, she's not real. She's a construct, the brain's way of coping with death. Real is a complicated word, Dr. Morrison said gently. Is she objectively present in the room? No. Is she a real experience for the patient? Absolutely. Does she serve a real function, reducing fear, providing comfort, easing the transition? Yes, in that sense, she's very real. But why do they all describe her so similarly? I pressed. Why a woman? Why blue? Why the same progression? That's where it gets interesting, Dr. Morrison said, and where my research gets more speculative. I think there may be a resonance effect. When one person in a space, say, a hospice facility, has this experience and talks about it, others hear about it. Even if they don't consciously remember, their brains store that information. Then, when they reach a similar state, their brains draw on that shared narrative. It becomes a kind of cultural transmission, a shared experience within a specific community. So the patients in my hospice are all seeing the same figure because they've heard about her from other patients? Possibly. Or from staff who've unconsciously referenced her. Or it's in the air, so to speak. The shared expectation of what dying looks like in that specific space. The brain is incredibly sensitive to context and expectation. It shapes our experiences more than we realize. I thought about all my patients who'd seen the woman in blue. How many of them had heard other patients talking about her? How many had picked up on subtle cues from staff? How much of this was shared human neurology and how much was learned behavior? I know this might be disappointing, Dr. Morrison said, watching my face. People often want deathbed visions to be proof of an afterlife or of something transcendent, and I'm offering a biological explanation instead. No, I said slowly. It's not disappointing. It's beautiful, actually. That our brains do this for us. That dying isn't just shutdown and darkness, but this rich, meaningful experience. That we create comfort for ourselves, even at the end. That we share this experience with each other, passing it forward. There's something profound in that. Dr. Morrison smiled. That's exactly what I think. This isn't reduction. This is understanding how remarkable the human brain is, even, especially, at its end. After my conversation with Dr. Morrison, I had to decide what to do with this information. Did I tell families that their loved ones' visions were neurochemical processes and cultural conditioning? Did I keep the mystery? Let them believe whatever brought them comfort? I started with small steps. When families asked me about their loved ones seeing things, I offered more complete information. This is common in the final days of life, I'd say. The brain undergoes significant changes. It releases certain chemicals, processes differently. Many patients report seeing comforting presences, deceased loved ones, religious figures, peaceful guides. We think it's the brain's way of making the dying process less frightening. It's actually quite beautiful. Even at the end, your loved one's mind is working to protect them from fear. Most families found this comforting. It normalized the experience without taking away its significance. Some asked follow-up questions. Was it just hallucinations then? Was their loved one confused? Think of it this way, I'd say. When you dream, the images aren't objectively real, but the experience of dreaming is real. The emotions you feel are real. Your loved one is having a real experience, even if it's generated internally. And that experience seems to bring peace. That's what matters. In March, I cared for a patient named Eleanor Wright, 92, dying of natural old age. Eleanor had been a psychology professor, sharp and curious until her final weeks. When she started seeing the woman in blue, she was fascinated by her own experience. "I'm hallucinating," she told me matter-of-factly. "My brain is dying and creating comforting imagery. It's remarkable." "Does knowing that make it less meaningful?" I asked. "Not at all," Eleanor said. "If anything, it makes it more meaningful. My brain, this organ that's been with me for 92 years, is doing one final kindness for me. It's saying, 'Don't be afraid. I've got you. I'll make this easier.'" How extraordinary is that? Eleanor died 3 days later. Her last words, to the empty corner of her room: "Thank you for everything. I'm ready now." I thought about Eleanor's perspective a lot. She'd understood what was happening to her brain and still found profound meaning in the experience. Maybe that was the key. You didn't have to choose between scientific understanding and emotional significance. You could hold both. But not every family was ready for scientific explanations. In April, I was caring for Michael Torres, 53, brain cancer. Michael's wife, Rosa, was deeply religious. When Michael started talking about seeing his mother, who died 20 years earlier, Rosa was overjoyed. "She's come to bring him home," Rosa said, tears streaming down her face. "She's here to guide him to heaven. It's a blessing, a sign that God is merciful." I didn't contradict her. Who was I to take away that comfort? Instead, I said, "Many families find great peace in these experiences. Whatever their source, they seem to help patients transition more peacefully." Rosa looked at me sharply. "You don't believe. You think it's just his brain failing." I chose my words carefully. "I think death is a mystery we don't fully understand. I've seen enough to know that something profound happens in those final days. Whether that's spiritual, neurological, or something else entirely, I don't claim to know. What I do know is that Michael seems peaceful. He's not afraid, and that's a gift, however it comes." That seemed to satisfy Rosa. Michael died 2 days later, calling out to his mother, reaching toward something only he could see. Rosa held his hand and prayed, confident he was being welcomed into the afterlife. And who could say she was wrong? Her interpretation brought her comfort. Michael's brain had done its job, eased his fear, created meaning in his final moments. The mechanism didn't diminish the significance. I started having conversations with other hospice workers, sharing what I'd learned from Dr. Morrison. Some were relieved to have a scientific framework for what they'd been observing. Others were resistant. They wanted the mystery, the possibility of something transcendent. "If we reduce it all to brain chemistry," one nurse said, "doesn't that take away the magic? Doesn't that make death clinical and cold?" "I don't think so," I said. "The fact that our brains do this, that evolution or God or the universe designed us to have comforting experiences at the end, that seems like grace to me. Whether it's neurochemistry or divine intervention, the result is the same. Dying people find peace. Why does the mechanism matter? But it did matter to some people. Families wanted to believe their loved ones were seeing real spirits, real evidence of an afterlife. Medical staff wanted objective answers. Patients themselves varied. Some wanted scientific explanations, others wanted spiritual ones. I realized I couldn't give everyone what they wanted. All I could do was share what I'd learned, offer comfort where I could, and respect each person's interpretation of their own experience. In June 2025, I cared for a patient who changed everything again. Her name was Dr. Sarah Kim, 68, stage 4 lung cancer. Sarah was a neuroscientist. Specifically, she studied consciousness and perception. When she entered our hospice, she knew exactly what was happening to her brain and body. "I'm going to be your most annoying patient," she told me on her first day. "I'm going to analyze every symptom, question every medication, and document my own dying process. I hope that's okay." I liked her immediately. Sarah lived for 2 weeks in our care. During that time, she kept a detailed journal of her experiences, pain levels, medication effects, cognitive changes, and yes, perceptual anomalies. When she started seeing the woman in blue, she was thrilled. "There she is," Sarah said on her 8th day. "Right in the corner, middle-aged woman, blue cardigan, peaceful demeanor, textbook deathbed vision. Caroline, this is so exciting. I'm finally experiencing what I've only read about. You're not frightened? I asked. Why would I be frightened? I know what's happening. My visual cortex is hyperactive due to metabolic changes and medication interactions. My pattern recognition systems are working overtime. My brain is creating a comforting hallucination to ease my fear of death. It's elegant, beautiful even. Over the next days, Sarah documented her visions in detail. The woman moved closer each day, just as other patients had reported. Sarah noted the emotional quality of the experience. Despite knowing it was a hallucination, she felt genuine comfort from the figure's presence. That's the fascinating part, Sarah told me. My prefrontal cortex, the rational part, knows this isn't real, but my limbic system, the emotional part, doesn't care. It's responding as if the figure is real. I feel less afraid, more peaceful. My body is relaxing. Even knowing the mechanism doesn't stop it from working. On Sarah's 12th day, something changed. I came in for my evening check, and she was staring at the figure, now, according to her reports, standing right beside her bed, with a confused expression. "Sarah, are you okay?" "Something's wrong," she said slowly. "Or rather, something's different. The figure, she's changing. Or my perception is changing. I can't tell which. How is it changing? She's becoming more detailed, more real. I could write off a vague blue-clad figure as my brain filling in gaps. But this, Caroline, I can see individual threads in her cardigan, the pattern of lines around her eyes, a small scar on her left hand. That level of detail shouldn't be possible in a hallucination generated by a dying brain. I felt a chill. What do you think it means? I don't know. Maybe my visual processing is getting even more chaotic, creating hyper-realistic false details. Or, she trailed off. Or what? Sarah looked at me, and for the first time since I'd met her, she looked uncertain. Or, I'm wrong about what this is. Or we're all wrong. Or there's something happening that our current neuroscience can't explain. That night, Sarah's daughter Emma stayed with her. I was in the next room when I heard Emma call out. I rushed in to find Sarah sitting up in bed. Remarkable, given how weak she'd been, staring at the corner of the room with an expression of wonder and confusion. "Mom, what is it?" Emma asked, frightened. "She's talking to me," Sarah said. "The figure, she's talking. What's she saying?" I asked, though I felt foolish asking about a hallucination. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. She's saying it's okay, that I did good work, that I loved well, that Emma will be okay, that dying isn't an ending, it's a transition, that I won't be alone. "Mom, who is she?" Emma was crying now too. Sarah looked at the corner for a long moment. Then she smiled, a genuine, peaceful smile. "I don't know, but I'm not afraid anymore. Whatever she is, hallucination, archetype, neurological phenomenon, or something else entirely, I'm not afraid." Sarah died the next morning. Her last words, whispered to Emma, "Tell Caroline she was right, and also wrong. The brain is doing this, but there's more to it. There's something more." I've thought about those words every day since. It's been 6 months since Sarah died. 6 months since those final words that I still can't fully interpret. I've cared for dozens more patients since then, and the pattern continues. The woman in blue appears. Patients find comfort. Death comes more peacefully than it might otherwise. I still believe in the science, the neurochemistry, the brain processes, the pattern recognition. I've read Dr. Morrison's research, studied the brain scans, learned about endogenous DMT and terminal neural activity. I understand the biological mechanisms at play, but I also know there's something I don't understand, something science hasn't caught up to yet. Maybe it never will. Here's what I know for certain, Margaret. The dying brain does create these experiences. That's not in question. The visions aren't objectively real in the sense that you or I could see them if we were in the room. The consistency across patients suggests shared neurology and cultural transmission more than external presence. Modern neuroscience provides robust explanations for most of what I observe. But there's always a but. The level of comfort these visions provide is real and significant. The peace that comes over patients when they report seeing the figure is measurable. Their blood pressure lowers, their breathing eases, their pain seems to diminish. Even patients who intellectually know it's a hallucination find genuine comfort in the experience. The timing is uncannily consistent. The figure appears in the final week, progresses closer, and is typically at the bedside when death occurs. And sometimes, not always, But sometimes, patients report details or information they shouldn't have access to. Like Sarah, seeing specific details that seem too complex for a dying brain. Or patients reporting that the figure shared information about their families that later proved accurate. Or dying patients from different rooms reporting seeing the same figure, as if she moves between them. Are these anomalies explainable? Probably. Coincidence, cold reading, families sharing information that patients unconsciously remember and incorporate. But the fact remains, sometimes there are moments that make me wonder. I've stopped trying to convince anyone of a single interpretation. When families ask me what their loved one is seeing, I tell them, something real to them, something comforting, whether it's their brain creating a peaceful transition, or something spiritual, or both, it's helping them. That's what matters. Some families need the spiritual interpretation. They need to believe their loved one is being met by deceased relatives, is being guided to an afterlife. That belief brings them comfort through their grief, gives them hope that death isn't an ending. I'm not going to take that away with neuroscience lectures. Other families need the medical explanation. They're uncomfortable with what they perceive as confusion or delusion, knowing that this is a normal neurological process, that it happens to many patients, that it serves a function, that brings them peace. I can offer that too. And some families, like me, sit in the uncertainty. They accept that it's biological and maybe also something more, that the brain creates the experience and perhaps is also perceiving something real that we can't yet measure or understand. They're comfortable with mystery. Last week, I cared for a patient named Jennifer Wu, 41, ovarian cancer. Jennifer was my age, with 2 young kids. Watching her die was devastating. When she started seeing the woman in blue, her husband asked me, "Is she just confused? Is she suffering?" "No," I told him honestly. "This is her brain doing something remarkable. It's creating a comforting experience to ease her fear. Even at the end, even as her body fails, her mind is protecting her, loving her, making sure she doesn't face this alone, even if the companion she perceives is generated from within. That's not confusion. That's grace." Jennifer died holding her husband's hand, her eyes on the corner of the room, smiling. "She's beautiful," Jennifer whispered. "Tell the kids. Tell them Mommy went with someone kind, someone who made it okay." Her husband sobbed, but later he told me those words brought him comfort. His children could imagine their mother being met by a kind presence, even if that presence was a construct of her dying brain. The mechanism didn't matter. The comfort did. That's what I've learned after 22 years in hospice care and 6 months of really paying attention to this phenomenon. It doesn't matter if the woman in blue is neurochemical processes or something transcendent. What matters is that dying people find peace. What matters is that in our final moments, something, whether from within or without, meets us with kindness. I'm writing to you, Margaret, because I think people need to know about this. Not to prove or disprove anything spiritual. Not to reduce death to mere biology, but to help people understand what their loved ones might experience, to prepare them, to help them recognize these visions as normal and potentially comforting rather than frightening. When your mother, your father, your spouse, your child is dying, and they start seeing things you can't see, don't panic. Don't assume they're suffering or confused. Ask them gently what they're experiencing. Listen without judgment. Often they're finding comfort in those final visions. They're being met by something that makes the transition easier. Is it their brain? Yes. Is it also somehow real? Maybe. Both can be true. After 2 decades of hospice work, I've made peace with the mystery. I don't need to know exactly what the woman in blue is. I just need to recognize her presence in my patients' experiences and help their families understand that she's a gift, however she comes, whatever her source. Death is the one universal human experience. We all face it, and it seems that our brains, in their final act, do something extraordinary. They create companionship. They generate comfort. They build a bridge from life to whatever comes next, whether that's nothing or something we can't yet imagine. That's not sad. That's not reductive. That's beautiful. That's love, the brain's final act of self-love, protecting us from fear in our most vulnerable moment. So when you sit with a dying loved one and they tell you they see someone in the corner, someone peaceful, someone waiting, believe them. Not because you have to accept a specific metaphysical explanation, but because for them, in that moment, it's real and it's helping. That's all any of us want at the end. To not be alone, to not be afraid, to feel peaceful. The woman in blue, whoever, whatever she is, provides that. And that's enough. With deep respect for the mystery, Caroline Porter, RN Seattle Hospice Care. Margaret sets down the pages slowly, removing her reading glasses to wipe her eyes. She sits in silence for a long moment before speaking. That was Caroline's story. The hospice nurse who learned to stop needing answers and start trusting in comfort, whatever its source. I've been thinking about this story for 2 months now, friends. Thinking about how we want certainty in a world full of mystery. How we want to either fully believe in the supernatural or fully believe in science, as if those are the only 2 options. But what if, like Caroline suggests, both can be true? What if our brains create these deathbed visions through measurable neurological processes, and that doesn't make them less meaningful? What if the comfort is real, regardless of the mechanism? I'm not here to tell you what to believe about death, about consciousness, about what happens at the end. But I am here to share Caroline's message. If someone you love starts seeing things in their final days, don't be afraid. They're likely experiencing something that brings them peace, something that makes the transition easier. Whether that something is generated from within or comes from beyond, does it matter? The peace is real. The comfort is real. The love is real. To Caroline and to all the hospice workers who sit with dying patients, who witness these mysteries, who provide comfort without needing all the answers, thank you. Your work is sacred, whatever you believe about its mechanisms. And to all of you facing the loss of a loved one, or someday facing your own final days, may you find your own woman in blue, your own peaceful presence, your own comfort in the corner of the room. However she comes, whatever she is, you are not alone. Even at the end, especially at the end, something meets us with kindness. Good night, dear friends. Hold your loved ones close, and remember, the mysteries don't need solving. Sometimes they just need witnessing. Until next time.